Ali MacGraw was once the picture of grace and beauty, the woman who stole hearts in Love Story and became an icon of 1970s Hollywood. Steve McQueen, meanwhile, was the king of cool, a screen legend who embodied toughness and rebellion both on and off the screen. When the two fell in love, it seemed like the perfect Hollywood pairing, the golden couple who had it all: fame, fortune, and chemistry that lit up every room they entered. But behind the glamorous photos and red carpet appearances was a very different story, one that Ali MacGraw kept hidden for decades. Now, at 85 years old, Ali has finally spoken openly about what it was really like to be married to Steve McQueen, and her revelations are not the romantic fairy tale fans once imagined. Instead, they are a haunting reminder of how power, jealousy, and control can turn even the brightest love into a suffocating nightmare. Their marriage, lasting only 5 turbulent years, was plagued by explosive arguments, infidelity, and Steve's deep-seated need for dominance. Ali, who gave up her thriving career for the relationship, has admitted that she lost herself during those years. She sacrificed her independence and endured behavior that she now describes as controlling and, at times, deeply damaging. In this story, we uncover the truth behind Ali MacGraw's shocking confession, the struggles she endured, the emotional scars she carried, and the way Steve McQueen's dark side nearly consumed her. Ali MacGraw's life before Steve McQueen was a story of success that seemed destined for Hollywood legend. Born in Pound Ridge, New York in 1939, Ali was raised in a creative but modest household. Her father was an artist, her mother a teacher, and from an early age, Ali was drawn to beauty and expression. She studied art at Wellesley College, worked as a photographic assistant to the iconic Diana Vreeland, and quickly found her footing in the world of fashion. By the mid-1960s, she had become one of the most recognizable models in New York, her striking features appearing in major magazines. Hollywood came calling soon after. Ali's natural elegance translated seamlessly to the big screen, and she made her acting debut in the late 1960s. But it was 1970's Love Story that catapulted her into superstardom. The film, with its tragic romance and unforgettable line, "Love means never having to say you're sorry," became a cultural phenomenon. Ali was nominated for an Academy Award, won a Golden Globe, and instantly became one of the most bankable stars in the world. Her career seemed unstoppable. Around this time, Steve McQueen was already a household name. Known as the King of Cool, McQueen embodied the rugged anti-hero. From The Great Escape to Bullet, his films defined masculine rebellion for an entire generation. Off-screen, his persona was just as magnetic, dangerous, independent, and fiercely competitive. But behind the charisma lay a darker side. McQueen carried deep insecurities, a volatile temper, and a consuming jealousy that often poisoned his relationships. When Ali and Steve first crossed paths in the early 1970s, the attraction was immediate and electric. Both were at the height of their fame, and their chemistry was undeniable. They met during the filming of The Getaway in 1972, where they played husband and wife caught up in a life of crime. What audiences didn't realize was that the passion they saw on screen was spilling over into real life. The affair between Ali and Steve began quickly. Despite the fact that Ali was then married to Paramount producer Robert Evans, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, their romance was explosive from the beginning. McQueen's charm and intensity captivated Ali, who described him as unlike anyone she had ever met. He was unpredictable, dangerous, and thrilling, qualities that drew her in but also foreshadowed the chaos to come. For Steve, Ali represented not only beauty but also prestige. She was the refined East Coast intellectual to his rough-edged rebel, and together they looked like Hollywood royalty. But their love came with consequences. Ali's marriage to Robert Evans collapsed, a scandal splashed across tabloids at the time. Evans, who had been instrumental in launching Ali's career, was devastated by the betrayal. For Ali, the decision to leave her husband for Steve wasn't just personal, it was professional suicide. McQueen, famously controlling, demanded that she give up acting to focus entirely on him, and Ali, swept away by passion, complied. This decision marked the beginning of a dramatic shift in her life. In just a few short years, Ali had gone from being one of the most in-demand actresses in Hollywood to stepping away from the spotlight. At the time, she justified it as a sacrifice for love. Steve's presence was intoxicating, and she believed in the myth of their romance. But what she couldn't yet see was that she was giving up not only her career, but also her independence. The early days of their marriage painted the picture of a glamorous couple, admired and envied by many. Behind closed doors, however, cracks were already beginning to show. Steve's need for control, his jealousy, and his volatile temper would soon turn their relationship into a nightmare that Ali, decades later, would bravely describe as one of the darkest chapters of her life. From the outside, the marriage of Ali MacGraw and Steve McQueen looked like a Hollywood dream. They were both icons, beautiful and powerful, appearing at premieres and events as the ultimate star couple. But inside their home, the reality was much darker. For Ali, the marriage quickly became a prison, one built not of bars, but of Steve's possessiveness and volatile nature. McQueen's jealousy was legendary, and Ali became one of its prime victims. Despite his own history of infidelity, he was known to pursue affairs relentlessly. Often without discretion, he demanded absolute loyalty from Ali. Her past relationships and even professional friendships with men were enough to trigger his temper. She recalled years later that Steve would interrogate her about phone calls, meetings, and even casual interactions, convinced that she might betray him. This hypocrisy was suffocating, and it left Ali constantly walking on eggshells, fearful of setting him off. The control didn't stop there. Steve insisted that Ali give up her thriving acting career, a demand rooted in his insecurities. He wanted her attention focused solely on him, and he feared that her rising fame could eclipse his own. Reluctantly, Ali complied, stepping away from Hollywood at the very height of her stardom. At the time, she convinced herself it was a sacrifice made for love. But as the years wore on, the reality set in. She had been manipulated into giving up her independence. Ali later admitted that she didn't know who she was during those years. The strong, intelligent woman who had built a career from modeling to Oscar-nominated stardom became someone she barely recognized. Her world revolved entirely around Steve, his moods, his needs, his desires. McQueen, who thrived on control, had succeeded in stripping her of her autonomy. The irony was painful. While Ali gave up everything for their relationship, Steve continued his reckless lifestyle. He indulged in affairs, drank heavily, and engaged in dangerous behaviors that constantly put strain on their marriage. His career was equally chaotic. He was unpredictable on set, clashed with directors, and was infamous for his difficult demands. Ali bore the brunt of this chaos at home, often enduring emotional neglect and feeling invisible in the shadow of his larger-than-life persona. Perhaps the most horrifying part of their marriage was the emotional toll it took on Ali. She has since described the relationship as one that left her scarred, not physically but mentally. The constant stress, the loss of her career, and the feeling of being trapped with a man whose charm could turn to cruelty in an instant wore her down. She later confessed that she became addicted to alcohol during this period, a coping mechanism to numb the pain of her crumbling self-worth. What made it more complicated was Steve's own demons. McQueen's childhood had been marked by abandonment, abuse, and neglect, and he carried those wounds into adulthood. His need for control, his jealousy, and his volatile behavior were rooted in a deep fear of vulnerability. But for Ali, understanding the cause didn't make the effects any easier to live with. She was still the one enduring the daily reality of his insecurities and explosive anger. The glamorous facade of their marriage was maintained in public, but those closest to them could see the cracks. Friends noted that Ali seemed increasingly withdrawn, no longer the radiant star she had once been. Her career was gone, her independence stripped away, and her confidence eroded by years of living under Steve's thumb. By the late 1970s, the situation had become unbearable. The marriage was unraveling, and Ali found herself at a crossroads. The woman who had once seemed to have it all was now facing the possibility of losing everything: her career, her identity, and her happiness, to a man whose love had become a source of pain. the horrors of their marriage, which Ali would only fully reveal decades later, were about to lead her to a difficult but necessary decision: to finally leave Steve McQueen, despite the cost. By the end of the 1970s, Ali MacGraw's marriage to Steve McQueen had gone from glamorous romance to emotional cage. The woman who had once embodied Hollywood's fresh, independent spirit now found herself suffocating in a life dictated by fear, jealousy, and sacrifice. What had begun as passion and excitement had deteriorated into a toxic cycle of control and disillusionment. For Ali, the breaking point was drawing near. One of the most painful realizations came when she looked back on her career. At the time of Love Story, Ali had been the most sought-after actress in Hollywood, receiving scripts from every major director and producer. Yet during her marriage, she had walked away from it all at Steve's insistence. While he continued to work on films such as Papillon and The Towering Inferno, Ali sat on the sidelines, her once bright career now a shadow of what it could have been. By the time she began questioning her choices, Hollywood had moved on to the next generation of stars. Adding to her frustration was Steve's blatant double standard. He demanded Ali's total loyalty and obedience while continuing to live recklessly. His affairs were no secret, and his nights out often ended in drunken chaos. Friends of the couple later revealed that Steve's lifestyle left Ali feeling abandoned, humiliated, and powerless. She was expected to stay home, raise their son Josh, and remain silent while Steve indulged in every whim. Ali later confessed that she was terrified of leaving. Steve was not only intimidating but also deeply unpredictable. His temper could explode without warning, and she feared the consequences of defying him. Yet at the same time, staying meant losing herself completely. The emotional abuse, the erosion of her confidence, and the suffocating control were pushing her to the edge. The final straw came when Ali realized that no amount of sacrifice would ever be enough for Steve. She had given up her career, her independence, and her voice, and still, his jealousy and anger never subsided. Friends say that Ali began to see clearly that she was living in a one-sided relationship where love had long since been replaced by control. That clarity gave her the strength to make the most difficult decision of her life. In 1978, Ali filed for divorce. The news stunned Hollywood. The so-called golden couple of the 1970s was finished, and behind the headlines lay years of pain that few had truly understood. The divorce was bitter, with Steve fighting for custody of their son and refusing to provide Ali with financial security. Despite his immense wealth, he left her with almost nothing, forcing her to rebuild her life from scratch. For Ali, the aftermath was both liberating and devastating. On one hand, she was finally free from Steve's grip. On the other, she was left with little support, a career in ruins, and a young child to raise alone. She turned to alcohol as a coping mechanism, sinking deeper into addiction as she struggled to piece her life back together. The glamorous star who had once seemed untouchable was suddenly vulnerable, fragile, and adrift. Meanwhile, Steve's life continued its own chaotic path. He remarried, continued working, and remained a box office draw. But his demons never truly left him. He was diagnosed with mesothelioma, an aggressive cancer, in the late 1970s, and by 1980 his health was rapidly declining. Despite everything, Ali later admitted that she still cared for him, describing their relationship as painful but unforgettable. Steve died in 1980 at just 50 years old, leaving behind a legacy of both brilliance and destruction. For Ali, the divorce marked the beginning of a long journey of self-discovery. It forced her to confront not only the damage inflicted by her marriage, but also the parts of herself that had allowed her to remain in such a toxic situation. She later sought treatment for her alcoholism and began to speak openly about the importance of reclaiming one's independence and self-worth. After abuse, the horrors of being married to Steve McQueen were behind her, but the scars remained. And as Ali would later reveal, those scars shaped her in ways that she is only now, at 85, fully able to acknowledge. Today, at 85, Ali MacGraw lives a very different life from the glamorous world of Hollywood that once defined her. After decades of pain, sacrifice, and struggle, she has chosen peace over fame and truth over silence. Looking back, she has begun to speak more openly about the marriage that shaped and scarred much of her adult life. For Ali, breaking her silence has been both painful and freeing. She has admitted in interviews that she once felt enormous shame over giving up her career and enduring Steve McQueen's controlling behavior. For years, she carried the weight of regret, wondering how different her life might have been if she had resisted his demands. But with age has come clarity. Ali now recognizes that she was swept into a whirlwind romance with one of the most magnetic men of his era, a man whose charisma hid deep flaws that eventually consumed their marriage. "I was crazy in love," she once said, "but it came at a very high price." In later years, Ali turned her pain into a platform for growth. She confronted her alcoholism through recovery programs and embraced a more spiritual, grounded way of living. Moving away from Hollywood, she settled in New Mexico, where she has lived quietly for decades. There, surrounded by nature and a supportive community, Ali found the healing she once thought impossible. She immersed herself in animal rescue, environmental causes, and a life of simplicity that allowed her to rebuild her identity outside of fame. Ali's reflections on Steve McQueen are complex. She does not deny that he was a man of extraordinary talent and charm, nor does she ignore the fact that she once loved him deeply. But she also does not shy away from describing the darker truths. She has spoken of his insecurity, his jealousy, and the suffocating control he exerted over her life. She calls her marriage to him a nightmare, a warning to others about what happens when love becomes entangled with fear and domination. Yet even as she acknowledges the horrors, Ali refuses to see herself only as a victim. Instead, she emphasizes the lessons she has learned, the importance of independence, the danger of losing oneself in another person's shadow, and the strength it takes to walk away from a toxic relationship. "You cannot surrender your whole self for love," she has said. "It will destroy you." Her candidness has resonated with countless fans, especially women who see their own struggles reflected in her story. Ali's willingness to speak out later in life has given her a new kind of influence, far removed from the glitz of Hollywood. She has become a symbol of resilience, proof that it is never too late to reclaim one's truth and find peace after years of turmoil. As for Steve McQueen, his legacy remains complicated. On screen, he is still remembered as the ultimate rebel, the man who defined cool for a generation. Off-screen, those who knew him best often describe a man haunted by demons, battling insecurities, and struggling to balance fame with inner peace. Ali's honesty about their marriage adds another layer to that legacy, one that reminds fans that even icons can cast long, painful shadows on those closest to them. Now, in her twilight years, Ali MacGraw has finally reached a place of acceptance. She no longer hides from the past, nor does she let it define her present. Instead, she uses her story as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. The horrors of her marriage to Steve McQueen left deep scars, but they also shaped the wisdom and strength she carries today. Her words are a warning, a confession, and a triumph all at once. Ali MacGraw's truth may have taken decades to surface, but at 85, she has finally reclaimed her voice. And in doing so, she has reminded the world that behind every Hollywood romance lies a reality that is often far more complicated than the silver screen would have us believe.